Good afternoon or good evening there. This is Michael Cross with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio, where our motto is to question authority at any and all times and whoever or whatever it may be. Now, today's topic that I'd like to go over, and yeah, this is going to be the full 58 minutes I'm going over this because I think it's a very vital issue. But you know what? If you have anyone that you know who is bought into the whole population control thing, like we have to save the world by having no kids or just a few kids and that sort of thing. The whole, any growth is bad growth and the world's going to end. If you know people like that, you need to stay tuned because I'm going to go over all of those kinds of arguments, hopefully shoot them down adequately. It's going to be an informative hour. It's going to be one in which you can learn a few facts about demographics that are not presented in the mainstream media, that are not presented in education for the most part. But it's things that, there's kind of issues that when you do hear them and when you see the other point of view, it just slaps you in the face and you go, whoa, why didn't I think of that before? A lot of people have had those epiphany moments. Probably everyone listening right now has had those kinds of moments where assumptions they had were just totally shattered by hearing something or reading something that went contrary to the assumption. Well, that's what we're going to do tonight. And, before I get started there, I would encourage people to check out my website at michaelcross.net or my YouTube site just type into Google Michael Cross and check out some of the interviews we've done here in the past. Most of them are there, and maybe you'll find some stuff there that you would like to listen to that we've had lots of experts on psychopathy, and people like Noam Chomsky and Paul Craig Roberts and so forth are in there, amongst many other very interesting and talented guests. So anyway, let's get into this issue. And what I'd like to start out with is just saying this. I used to be so much into this population control thing. I was, when I was younger, I was totally into the idea that, when you hear about abortion statistics, you would actually think, you know what? If it wasn't for abortion in America, those kids would be being born, and we'd have to clothe them and feed them, and they'd be doing all kinds of horrible things to the environment. And I remember when I was in college, I still had that. I mean, I knew things like abortion was not a great thing or something, but I still had this idea that, oh wow, we got to have it, to kind of like that lifeboat analogy. You're on a lifeboat and you've got 20 people on it and several people are swimming towards you and you're thinking, well, wait a minute, no, if we take anyone else on board, everyone's going to drown because the boat's going to capsize. And I remember that scenario being presented in one of my high school classes on when it was dealing with population. There was also another one with the nuclear fallout shelter. You had space for like 10 people, but there's 15 and you had to figure out which 5 you were going to throw out. I think they still have those things in school, but I definitely remember back when I was in school having those lessons, and they were usually geared towards that whole idea that we need to preserve an adequate, sustainable, think about Agenda 21, sustainable economy and environment. Well, anyway, let's go on there and just say that I was challenged by someone in college, an educator, to actually look up what the truth was in regards to population issues. And so I was thinking to myself, well, I'll prove him wrong. I can't believe he's actually questioning it. And I started researching on my own. And I'm one of those people, when I start researching and I find something interesting, well, I'm going to cross-reference it and I'm going to check out everything and, see where it leads me. And I spent a lot of time in the University of Oregon library and looking through, those kinds of scientific and agricultural and demographic journals that probably are only read by maybe 1,000 academics, for each one of the journals. And I started finding things I was not really aware of. Well, for one thing, I found that a lot of propaganda was being focused on getting people not to have children. No, it wasn't the kind, if you remember back in the if you're old enough to remember back in the early 1970s, where there was stuff that was just right in your face. You'd turn on the TV and it would have a picture of a baby, and it would be like, this baby might be cute and cuddly, but think of the impact it's going to have on the environment and all those kinds of things. Or a lot of the sitcoms were dealing with population issues and so forth. It was and can't forget Soylent Green and movies like that. They even had a episode of Star Trek where there's a planet where they're overpopulated because they found all the cured all diseases, and they've extended mortality. There's just no place for people to stand. These kinds of things were really promoted back then, but it was more in your face, and it could be the reason why a lot of people just kind of resisted it. Even in the early 70s when it was so big. But today it's a lot more subtle, and I think having things subtle is way more effective. It goes back to old Edward Bernays, that our tastes are molded and our fashions dictated and our values created by people that we've never heard of, by elites that are behind the scenes, that pretty much mold the opinions of most people in society. Because you know what? Most people just follow the flow. They don't want to resist too much. Oh, they might have something that they consider going against the crowd, like a purse that no one else has, or a style of makeup, or something like that. That's a little bit different, and they feel like, oh, this is expressing my individuality. Well, that's all fine and good, but usually today it seems like everything is based on showing your individuality through buying something a corporation has made. I mean, how is that expressing your individuality? You're just following a trend. You're just part of a demographic or targeted segment of the population that they have calculated will buy that sweater or this style or this food or so forth. Even our food taste, they calculate through psychometric profiling what types of people will buy it and how much and when. So it's very scientific. It's getting more so that way too. But anyway, let's get into that whole population thing here in more detail. I'm going to start right off. Why do people give birth in the first place? That's a good question. Well, probably most people would say, well, it's because they like to have sex and they make babies. Okay, well and good in a very natural society in which there's no birth control. I mean, no birth control available. It doesn't matter how much the people like or dislike having a kid, they're going to get pregnant. And so people, that's the first one, though, is accident. Now, I'm not going to say that a kid is something. I remember something Obama said about, well, he wouldn't want one of his daughters burdened with an unplanned pregnancy, and a lot of people jumped on that, and they rightly should have jumped on him for that. But you know what? I just wonder how many good Christian families there are out there that have their 2 kids in their suburban house and everything planned out in their life. Do they jump for joy when suddenly the wife finds out, oops, the birth control didn't work and I'm pregnant? Yeah, I just wonder about that, because I remember I was listening to a presentation by someone once, and he was talking about, people should accept the gifts of God that are given. And then he was talking about that it was hypocritical for people to really get down on some teenager that gets pregnant accidentally and is worried about what she's going to do, to really come down on her hard. But then if you find out you're pregnant with your 3rd or maybe 4th kid and it wasn't planned, that you all of a sudden are like thinking those same things that she would. Maybe you have the benefit at least of being married, but the thing is, you're still going to have those feelings. And people should think about that. Do we look upon the gift of a child as being a burden, as something that just is a hazard of sex? Well, I'm just wondering how many people that say that they're all religious and everything might actually have that attitude. But we'll get back to that. I tell you what. First of all, people have kids by accident. Second, people have kids because they love kids. There are people out there that don't like kids very much, okay? I've met many of them. I know a guy has 3 kids. He actually told his wife, "Really, I know that you really like kids. I don't really like kids that much, but you know what? I love you enough that, he's a good father. He's a very proud father, but he just said he didn't really get into kids that much. He didn't really have some overall plan to have a family." But anyway, the people that really do like kids and find them being really special, they tend to have more kids. And then you have religion. If you belong to a religion that says, "Thou shalt multiply and replenish the earth," hey, guess what? I lifted that from the Bible. It's there several times. That's something most of your mega preachers won't preach about because it's kind of controversial. But it is in there. And the people that tend to get really into religion, it doesn't matter what religion, the more conservative someone is in religion, the more children they tend to want and the more they tend to have. And even if their religion's not, really hardcore towards being pro-natalist, you still have a situation in which religious people tend to have an outlook on life that is seeing the bringing forth of a new spirit into the world as being really special. And so they're not going to think of it as just like, okay, well, I guess got another kid here. They're going to be thinking of the spiritual implications of creating life. And, you think about it, when a man and woman come together and make a baby, that's the only time you actually truly share in creation. All other things out there is basically just rearranging. You can build a house, but you're just rearranging some dead wood to put together and some other materials. When it comes to making a child, you are bringing genetics together. Now, I know there's some biotech people out there that are going, "Yeah, but I have another way." Well, but traditionally, that's the only way that you can create life. And finally, nationalism. Nations that are really, really promoting nationalism tend to have more kids, because then you take pride in whatever your ethnic or national group is, and you want to have more. So the idea that, maybe you're a country of 20 million people, and you're thinking, well, maybe in a few years we'll have 30 million people. Well, that's how nationalism works. And you can find examples of nationalism throughout the world, although not much of it left in Europe, with possibly the exception of Russia. And it brings up a good point there. In most of our humanistic secularist societies, nationalism is almost equated with racism. In fact, in some societies it is. You can be nationalist but not be racist, but still the left tries to present it as if a pride in country is in some way racist. And it's not, unless you define the pride in someone's country or their religion, their ethnic group or whatever as being racist, and therefore, you make the definition, therefore you can call someone something. I know there are people that do that. But nationalism is a very strong force that's pro-natal, and I'm just wondering if maybe one of the reasons why it's attacked so vehemently in the Western societies is because that is a way to make sure that people don't want to have kids as much. Now, you look at all these things together. Modern society has pretty much found ways to prevent accidental births. Okay? I mean, if a person really doesn't want to have kids and they have half a brain, there are plenty of ways to avoid getting pregnant. And so the accident births, they're just not that many. Okay? I mean, ultimately, the risk has been taken way down ever since the invention of the birth control pill and such. You got to remember, 1950s, a lot of people didn't mess around outside of marriage because they were scared to death that it was going to result in a baby. And how are you going to explain that to your parents or to your wife or to your husband or whatever, if it's not, according to the, husband gets wife pregnant or something like that, and in a married couple. So ultimately, the accident part was taken out with the birth control pill. Of course, that led to sexual experimentation and so forth, and has led to a lot of cultural shifts that most people don't understand. Most people don't analyze it that much. But the birth control pill has had a huge, profound impact on Western society's religious values, economic values, and political values. But I think I'm going to save that for another show. Now, the whole thing with love of kids. Well, isn't it weird how in our society today that we're kind of told that, that kids are somewhat of a burden? It used to be that you got a career so you could earn money so you could raise kids. And now it's you get a career so that you can make a name for yourself or advance according to the career ladder. And, a lot of times kids interfere with that. So kids suddenly become a burden because what's ultimately your goal is to advance in a career objective. And it's no longer, I make money so I can raise a family. It's not that way in Western society. Family becomes on the side. Religion has been marginalized in much of Western society. I think the only societies I can think of where it's kind of had a rebound in significant terms, and not only a rebound in belief, but a rebound in adherence, wanting to live according to those beliefs, is actually Russia, which is ironic, isn't it? I mean, back, many of you remember when Russia was officially atheist under the USSR. And now, what's that scripture in the Bible? The last shall be first and the first shall be last. Think about where America's at. I remember a quote from Brigham Young. He said that it's better to be a step out of hell and heading to heaven than a step out of heaven and heading to hell. Well, I think at some point, America and Russia kind of passed each other on that path, with the Russians heading to heaven. But if you're looking at very, very much the religious values of the nation. Now, here's my point here on population. One of the things that really bothers me is that population control is so institutionalized. It is so ingrained in Western society that it's almost an assumption that you're going to have 2 kids or less. Now, the thing is, if you lived in a society where basically it was just, you got both points of view from the population control people and the people that came across from the other side, that would be fine. People can make informed choices. I totally agree with that. I don't take, George Bernard Shaw's idea that, only 2% of people think, 2% of people pretend to think, and the rest of them would rather never think. I think that most people would like to consider at least various aspects of an issue. But that's not the way it is in our society. It is presented as if I come across as an individual, especially male, but not limited to being male, if I come across as an individual and say people should consider having more children, I am going to be labeled all kinds of nasty things. I remember one internet forum, I just made a comment that maybe the birth rate is too low in the United States, and someone accused me of being a racist. Okay, well, the thing is, of course, we could attribute that to someone's mental disorder out there, being given a computer and the ability to log on to a website. But at the same time, I don't know if that's necessarily a statistically small number of people that would react that way. But no matter what the case is, people are told that they should keep the population to 2 or less kids. And 1 is even better, and none is the greatest. And that is so ingrained. And then, of course, if another person, besides myself, were to come along and say, well, people should have less kids, they're seen as being enlightened. They're not going to get criticized. They're not going to be told, oh, well, you're being racist because you're saying that these people here in whatever part of the world should have less kids. But yet you get all kinds of names, and you're told that you're against gender equality and all this other stuff if you actually encourage people to have a family. That has been ingrained too. Now, where does it start? Well, I would say this. For one thing, there are a lot of foundations out there that really push the idea of population control. I mean, they have put money into programs to figure ways to get people to have less kids. And you may think, well, do people just have less kids because of the economy? No, that is not the case. Compare where your economy is now and how much work you have to do compared to what it was in the 1950s. Okay, when you had to make all your food yourself, you didn't have maybe even a clothes washer. A lot of stuff, a lot of conveniences weren't there that now have made life much easier in regards to raising kids as well. Plus, you got all kinds of vaccines that make sure that at least your kids won't die of polio and those kinds of things, which they did back then. But I want to give you a perspective on where Western civilization is, and I think most of it has to do with these kinds of programs that are aimed at getting people to have less kids. And that is the countries where people have about an average of one kid. Now remember, when you have an average of around one kid, that means your population is going to be cut in half. Okay? It also means that there's people out there in that country that probably have 2 or 3 kids, which means there's a huge segment of the population that's just dying out, that's chosen just to go sterile and not have any kids. And just think about how that affects the gene pool, especially when we consider a lot of, whenever I hear about a really creative person, I don't care what the race they are, what religion they are, but when you have someone who's super creative, super intelligent, and they say, you know what, I'm not going to have kids. The first thing that goes through my mind is what a waste, because that won't be passed on to the next generation. That is a huge waste. Now, you don't have to be some big proponent of eugenics or anything like that to realize that that is a waste, even if it was not genetic. Okay? Now, we do know, obviously, that intelligence has a genetic component. However, if it wasn't genetic, then we'd have to consider what kind of environment would that person raise a child or 2 children or 3 children in, were they to have kids. And you know that they would expose those kids to learning, and they would have them have a work ethic, and they would have all these other disciplines in life. They wouldn't just park their kid in front of the TV set. And the thing is, you would have kids coming along that would actually refute that whole, well, we have better quality if we have less quantity. Totally incorrect. Totally incorrect. It's not a numbers game. It is actually that many people who are caring, intelligent, hardworking, I don't care what their background is, they're not having kids. And that, I think, is a waste. But anyway, think about this, though, when we look at countries. I looked up the 10 countries that have the smallest birth rates, and it means that they're averaging about 1 kid per family, which means these countries are on the way out demographically. At some point, someone's just going to have to shut off the light when they're gone. And that is Germany, Latvia, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Bulgaria, Slovenia, Andorra, Spain, Italy, and Austria. All of these are Christian nations. Now, I was actually kind of surprised. I thought Japan would be in there because they have a really low birth rate. I'm going to get to that in a moment. But these guys have a lower birth rate. That's ironic. These countries in Europe have a lower birth rate than China does. And in China, they really encourage people to have a low birth rate. Okay, sometimes through very strict economic penalties if you do not have, if you do not stick with the 1 child per family. Now, I guess they've loosened it up. If you have a husband and wife that both came from a 1-child family, they can have 2 kids. But still, China has a higher birth rate than these countries here, many of which have all the wonderful national health care and all that. So when you go have a baby, you have a baby and no one pays for it. I mean, the state pays for it, obviously, the taxpayers. But it's ultimately not going to be as big a burden as it might traditionally be in a lot of other countries where it's up to you or else. Now, foundations, if you look it up, just put this into Google. Foundations support population control. And you will find all kinds of stuff. You don't have to dig through the library anymore to find information. You can find it on the internet. Okay? Right at your fingertips. The internet is for a lot of things besides kitty cat pictures, porn, and, keeping up on your favorite rock group or something like that. There's a lot of good information out there. Now, the thing is, you can also find stuff. You look up this topic: soap operas, Latin American birth rate reduction. That's right. There are actually foundations or groups out there that help with script writing or suggestions to incorporate themes of having less kids into very popular TV shows and soap operas. You think that doesn't happen here in the United States? Think about that. How many times do you see kids presented in most TV shows? And you got to remember, people tend to follow what the crowd does. Okay? If you, in every one of your TV shows, showed an average of 3 kids per family, people would tend to have a higher birth rate. If you show, on the other hand, you show people getting married when they're like 38 and 39 and maybe considering having a kid, then it makes having children seem a little bit more foreign to them, especially if maybe they were raised as an only child and they weren't surrounded by people that had families or very large families. So it all works in there. But just look for that. I could go through here and quote all kinds of stuff from the Club of Rome and all these big foundations. You know the names. Just you find it you find tons of information on the net where population is listed as the most crucial issue, and any means possible to get people persuaded to have smaller families is supported. I wonder. I've seen stuff written by people, but I'm not sure how effective. But still, I just wonder if a lot of the promotion of alternative lifestyles in the press, in TV shows and stuff, is not to really get people to feel more sympathetic towards those people so they won't be persecuted. No one should be persecuting people anyway, but to make it look like something more people should consider. Think about how you reduce population in that way. Now, again, in fairness, there's plenty of people out there who may not be in the monogamous husband-wife, male-female relationship, but they still want kids. But usually, even if it's women, 2 women that wind up married to each other will generally only have 1 or 2 kids, which means they're going to have a birth rate similar to those or lower than those 10 countries in Europe with the suicidal birth rates that I'm listing, because it's going to be somewhat difficult to everyone just having kids and stuff like that. I've seen some cases of women relationships though where they have had large families, but it's pretty rare. Generally, it's 1 or 2 kids for 2 women, and to just replace 2 women in the population, you have to have somewhere around 5 kids, be born between them, because just barely 2 will not lead to replacement. And I'll get to that in just a moment. I got to talk about that. No, heck, I'm going to deal with it now. Look, think about this. If a person has 2 kids, and that's the highest they're ever going to go for, okay? 2 kids. 2. That's it. And let's say the ideal for a family is 2, to where they're thinking, I would never have just 1 kid, and I certainly want to have kids, so I'll go for 2. How many generations would it take for that family to totally disappear so that the original couple would have no genetic descendants? Well, think about it. Only takes 1 kid to maybe announce that they're gay. That's going to severely limit the childbearing. 1 in 6 couples has fertility problems. All right, and I think it ultimately comes out to maybe around maybe 1 in 10 will never be able to have kids. So you got the infertility. Most people will only bring children into the world currently. That may change in the future, but most people will only bring a child into the world, at least with the middle class people, if they're married. I know it's catching on, the idea amongst educated career women of the middle class, that it's catching on more of going to sperm banks and having a baby that way. But still, that's only probably going to be 1 or maybe 2 kids that they're going to have in that case too. But a lot of women will not get married. Okay? And I'm talking about women because ultimately women are the ones that count in this whole thing. Because they're the ones that reproduce. Men can't reproduce, so on their own. So therefore, women can actually statistically keep the birth rate up even if they're not getting married and so forth. After World War II, actually, even with all the decimation of millions of Russian men, the birth rate was much higher in Russia at the end of World War II than it is today, because women were encouraged to continue having children. Stalin thought about bringing in polygamy, but for a variety of reasons he didn't, mostly because he didn't want to probably get joked around about being the Sultan of Russia or something. But women were encouraged to find, if maybe your village only had 3 or 4 younger, able to have kids, good men in the village, and, find one of those men and get pregnant by him. And so many Russian women did have 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 kids after the war to replace the population that had been decimated. And they set up a child care system that would take care of these women, so they could work, but at the same time someone would take care of their children. But still, that's the important thing. I remember reading something where in China, this is when they were really having some controversies over the one-child family, and a lot of people were having boys. Some population expert in China said, well, it's good that they're having more boys than girls because boys won't reproduce. In that sense, women are the vessels for reproduction. Ultimately, they have the wombs. And so therefore, if you have, basically, even in a family, if you have a daughter, you have a much better chance of being a grandparent than if you have a son. All right, males have an ability to have more kids. Obviously, they could have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids, potentially. But more men die without children than women do. Okay? So, yeah. Anyway, let's go on there. The 2-child per family limit. You're still going to get mortality. You're going to get children born with defects and so forth. So I've read that actually it takes about 3 generations, but let's just be generous and say 6 generations. But the thing is that 2 will eventually lead to the end of that family line. Statistically speaking, there's going to be some that will make it, but statistically speaking, that family line will disappear if their ultimate goal is 2, because not all of them will be able to reach 2, either for sociological or biological reasons. Now, then we have education. Oh my gosh, I remember that stuff. I still so remember all the science textbooks. And I looked through those. I loved science when I was in school. And later I just as an experiment, I looked through the most popular science textbooks in Oregon schools. And there was always, it seemed, there might have been an exception, I don't know, but it always seemed that every textbook had a chapter on population, extolling the virtues of Malthus, saying that, oh my gosh, the ecosystem, the number one threat is population. Okay? It never mentioned that already, even in the late 1970s and early 80s and so forth, the population of America, the birth rate was below replacement. Not mentioned. And you know what? I did some experiments with young people in America. I'd go into a classroom, and this was like in the early 90s, and I would say, what's the birth rate in America? And most of the kids would say somewhere around 3 kids. A lot of them would say 2.5 average. Far from it. Birth rates around 1.8. But the thing is, everyone's been kind of trained to think it's growing. It's not. If we didn't have immigration into the United States, the population would be shrinking right now. Okay? Now, I do think it's ironic that now they're noting that, well, maybe we need to have more immigration because people didn't have enough kids during the 70s and 80s and 90s. So, but those same people that were told not to have kids by the same people in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, many of them did so because they felt it was a social responsibility not to have more kids. Just think about that. Anyway, but education, very, very, very important in convincing people of the environmental causes. Everything from global warming to ice ages. I still remember those those chapters on the ice age that was going to come because of the carbon or whatever it was in the atmosphere at that time. And that the world was going to come to an end. And we're going to have that kind of Soylent Green world in which people are going to be starving and they're going to be rioting in the streets and so forth. Back to the old population bomb stuff. But you know what? Didn't come true, did it? In fact, many of those countries are better off today than they were before. India, they have a population much larger than they did back in the 70s and 80s. But now we look to India as being one of those countries that will eventually overtake the United States economically. As China's now the number one economy. Now per capita, not the number one economy. But when it comes to money, it is the number one economy, and it shows no sign of losing that position. All right? They're big. They have population, they have resources, they have the money to buy resources they don't have. So, all these people that were like, oh, the world's going to end. Well, they might say, well, yeah, but if it hadn't been for that one-child policy in China, but then you look at India. They didn't have it. Now, I will note this, though. Urbanization tends to reduce population on its own. A lot of people, if they live in small apartments, only have a couple of kids. You don't need to be telling them they have to have less. And as the economy grows, people, working out, of the home, your population's going to be below replacement at some point. But yet we still keep harping on it. You'll have less and less and less and less and less. So therefore, it's going to be even more below that replacement, because even the people that can afford the bigger homes or the homes in the suburbs are still only having 1 or 2 kids, even though they have houses they could fit 5, 6, 7 or more kids very comfortably. Now, also, let's not forget all those wildlife shows. I used to love those when I was a kid. And they always had a section like, well, yeah, these are really neat animals, but they're all going to die off because people are encroaching on their habitat. So that is just like, bang, 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 bang. And then the media. Now, the media, I already said the thing about the, presenting soap operas and things like that challenge people's ideas of what the ideal family is. So you start showing TV shows where only 1 or 2 kids is the ideal, and people getting married at a much later date in their life. So they only have the possibility of having 1 or 2 kids, statistically, for the woman at least. Now, there's another thing I want to throw in, though, just besides what you see on TV, and that's the personalities of those we see in the movies and journalism. If you're going to be a successful actress or female anchor woman, most of these people have had to make sacrifices, and often that means they sacrifice family. Now, there's some notable exceptions to this, but many, many of the people that young girls might look up to, especially successful actresses, they don't have families. They don't have kids. And if they do have kids, they have them later in life. They have them when they're like 36, 37, 38 years old. And again, medically, that's taking a huge risk if you're not the most fertile person, if you've waited that long, because you may not wind up getting pregnant if you wait that long. I mean, there's been doctors in England saying, there's a danger here of believing that, I'm going to wait till I'm 40 to have kids, that a lot of people won't have kids then. And they need to look at this, of course. And again, the feminists get angry, saying, well, you're scaring women into wanting to have babies and stuff like this, so they'll have families. Well, whatever happened to just saying, okay, this is a medical fact, take it, look at it. If you choose to wait until you're older to start having a family, that's your choice. But don't wind up saying, well, wait a minute, I thought, which is what a lot of doctors, especially in like the UK and some other areas too, have been warning young women against. Trying to say that, well, you should be aware of this, and they get attacked for doing that. Now, on top of that, like I said, the movies, and so forth, again, the ideal is always small. And, they also give that idea that, well, when you're older, you can adopt a kid maybe, or that sort of thing. Again, the media is not where you look. You want to find examples of people having large families. Now, sometimes there's exceptions with men. They might have 3, 4, 5 kids, but it's usually a situation in which their spouse, usually I say, not always, but usually, their spouse is not involved in movie making and so forth. They're either staying at home or they've got some job that accommodates being able to also, usually, when you're rich though, you have nannies and stuff like that, but they can still accommodate a family at the same time they have these kinds of careers. So again, examples people look up to. They have well, let's talk to this person about their life, and there's no kids involved. They might say, yeah, I'm happily married, got a couple dogs and stuff. Well, that is a very powerful message, because human beings are ultimately, at least originally, storytelling and role modeling, looking up to role modeling. And so therefore, if all the role models and the stories really don't have kids involved, or very few kids involved, then that gets incorporated into the subconscious of people when they're growing up. And that's the norm. Now, I would really encourage people to also check out, there's a series called Demographic Winter. Last I saw, it was at Brigham Young University television. They had a link to it, BYU. But Demographic Winter also goes to the statistics and the scenarios of what happens when you don't have enough kids. And it's not something usually point out. One thing that is just not really emphasized, in modern times when you're dealing with economies, is the reason why Japan has not really gotten themselves out of a recession that's been going on a lot longer than the world recession. One of the big reasons is the fact that they're just not having enough kids. And so therefore, the young workers that normally would be coming in and keeping the life flowing in the economy, they're not coming in. Now, I'm saying is, some people would say, well, they should just have immigration. Well, Japan does not want to have immigration. Okay, their policy is negative to immigration. So they're going to be shrinking a lot. They're to the point that they're like working on robots that will be lifelike and will take care of the children. I mean, not children, but the old people in rest homes. Think about that. Okay, you have a worker shortage, you create robots. Now, I think it's much easier just to have more kids, but it's not happening there. And a lot of people, because of the culture promoting this idea that, oh, I've got to have this and this and this before I get married. Same things happen in America too. Of course, there's in Japan, there's more of a stigma about having relationships outside of marriage. But the thing is that Japan, a lot of men, even like a huge percentage of men, are what they call herbivore men, and they've given up on relationships with women. Many of them have apps on their cell phones, an electronic girlfriend. And I was just reading Daily Mail. They're talking about they've actually achieved some really spectacular things in Asia, not just Japan, in regards to making robots very lifelike. And these may be in the future the partners of many a man who just has given up on trying to find a real woman. And that's going to be interesting for the birth rate, isn't it? I mean, think about how that might go. I mean, if you still want a family, I mean, I guess you could get yourself a robot that would take care of the children too, but you would just go and have create a child in an artificial womb just buy an egg cell and inseminate it and put it into the artificial womb, pick it up, and then you could have your family with your synthetic wife who never ages. In fact, you could change various characteristics of her as time goes on, or you could upgrade later for a new model that's more lifelike. You think that's kind of like a science fiction show. Well, you know what? Science fiction has a way of coming true. Okay, but just look at the article. Just look at Google. Just Google the term Daily Mail robots and sex, and you'll find the article about that. So, welcome to the future. Anyway, some other aspects. I was just now talking about a lot of the young people in Japan giving up on relationships. Well, the same is happening here too. Okay, the millennials are finding that, look, they're like a huge victim of globalization. They still have the same expectations on life, they as their previous generations. They look at the house that they were raised in. Mom and dad, usually baby boomers, born up until around, maybe a little bit millennials, some of baby boomers, many of them older generation Xers. The older generation Xers, 1960 to 73. The people before 1960, baby boomers, and then Generation Y after that. But most of the millennials, their parents, I guess, are Generation Xers. And they still had a chance to get that college degree and get the job and do pretty good. Or if they were working class people, they still had the job at the factory or the mill or so forth. So the homes that they grew up in were pretty nice. Depending on what social class they were in, they could live a pretty good lifestyle. But each generation's kind of had a decrease in lifestyle. Baby boomers, they were raised where mom could stay home and dad was able to have a house for everyone, and everyone, have a pretty good standard of living. The Generation X, they could still have the standard of living, but it usually required dad working full time and mom working at least half time. And then as time has gone on, now you got a situation where their young people are stuck with a mountain of debt when they go get a college degree, because mom and dad usually don't have enough money to actually pay for the college degree, out of pocket. But the kids might, on paper, they come from families that don't qualify for a lot of financial assistance. And so they take loans. They get out of college and there's no job, and they still have all these loans. And this is creating a situation that's very dangerous for our birth rate, because many of these people are just staying at home. You got situations where men are like 30 years old, living at home with their parents, not really seriously dating. If they do go out with women, it's more of let's go have some fun, kind of a serial monogamy type of thing. No, not really settling down and having a family. And eventually what happens is, what's probably going to happen at least, is these guys will get into their late 30s, and then they will actually, many of them will have to settle down, and they'll have jobs by them, and then they'll find themselves some young woman to get married to and start a family. But at the same time, the women that were their age cohorts will be kind of stuck with nothing. They'll have been strung along, wasting 2 or 3 years here, 2 or 3 years there, with various guys, and then wind up with being 38 years old, no family, and no prospects, no guy that they want to settle down with. Because a lot of these guys, it'll either be half of them will have jobs that will be adequate, and the other half will not. Welcome to globalization. Welcome to what Guy Standing calls the precariat. A takeoff of the proletariat. So the thing is, we're our millennials who should be, settling down, having families, are not doing so, except for the really successful ones. So the ones, they're sort of the poor ones. Well, they can get government assistance. The really rich, the well-to-do ones, upper middle class, so forth, they can have families. And the right in the betweens, the ones that are the people that are just kind of the basic middle class, usually, they're not having families. Okay? So that's a very, very big danger right now. Again, a lot of it has to do with expectations. A lot of these people are like, women would actually say, I'm not going to marry a guy and live in some little trailer someplace, or I'm not going to live in something that's below where I think I should be right now. And they're basing that on what they grew up with. And guys, kind of the same. Well, many of them are like, well, I'm not going to ask a woman to commit to me if I can't at least show that I'm worthy. And so you got a situation where there's a lot of guys and girls who are just not getting together, but they still have their biological impulses, so they're still going out there and, they have relationships, but they're not long term. Now, the thing is that, again, I would actually say that some people may argue with me here and just kind of, to quote Hillary Clinton on an unrelated issue, just, what difference does it make? What's happening like that? Well, ultimately, it's going to make a huge difference when it comes to the economy, young populations that are able to bring in innovation, or at least just be good customers in our consumeristic economy. They're dynamic. They grow. They have promise for the future. The other thing is you need these young people getting raised up because they're the ones that have to take care of the old people. Okay? I mean, when you pay into all these pensions and Social Security, it's kind of like a pyramid scheme with the assumption that when you get up there, you're one of the survivors that makes it to 65 or probably 70 here soon. You make it that far, then the money that you paid in that took care of the people that lived to their 90s or so, you've done your share, and now it's time for the young people to do their share and pay into your retirement. And that this would just keep going on and on and on. When Social Security was adopted, I think it was a good idea. And in those days, when you had a birth rate that was adequate, it worked. This is going to be the end. I tell you, this is going to be the end of the social welfare system in Europe and the United States, because there's not going to be enough. Even with immigration, you're still not going to have the growth that you need to sustain the population, the economy, and also take care of the old people. Okay? Well, maybe the Japanese will invent some robots to take care of the old folks. I don't know. But then you're going to get into situations where maybe some of the people resent having to take care of the old people. People, for instance, my dad paid into the system. I have no trouble. I don't feel that bad paying into Social Security because I know some of it's going to him. But at the same time, when I hear people say, well, I'm not going to have any kids, and I'm thinking, my kids have to pay for them, I think that's kind of unfair. And the thing is, we could also look at the fact that we are the product of people that survived plagues. We survived despotic rulers and nasty kings and wars and every number of horrible things. And you know what? We're the ones who come from the ones that survived those things long enough to have kids. That's a pretty awesome concept when we think about that. I mean, obviously, I look at it from a more religious standpoint too, but just looking at it just from a purely secular viewpoint, that's pretty awesome. We're the ones who are the products of the people who knew how to make it and also were able to push themselves forward genetically. That's right. The ones that didn't, well, they're gone. They're disappeared. They have no one puts flowers on their graves. Okay, I mean they have no family, and I think that's something to really take a certain amount of. I think it's just something that's awe-inspiring. I don't care how rich you are or poor you are. Even if you're some poor person living out in the middle of Appalachia in a trailer court, your ancestors made it. Okay? And you should be proud of that. Just as much as some Rockefeller or Carnegie can sit back, yeah, well, my ancestors did this. Okay, well, they made it too, but biologically speaking, everyone's equal, okay, in that sense. So that's why I think that, when I see some couple that, they don't have a lot of money, but they have 6 kids, well, there's a certain level of success there that goes beyond money. And then you look at it from just a socio-evolutionary standpoint. Okay, fine. Yes, they've succeeded. They're the winners in purely Darwinistic terms. And also, you could look at it from the fact that their culture will pass through and be magnified. People, look at the Shakers. They didn't have kids. Their culture's gone. It's dead. Religions in America, the more liberal the religion is, the fewer children it has, they're going to die out too. I'd say in 20 years, many of the churches that you look at now and think, well, that's mainstream Protestantism, will be gone. Because while maybe the evangelicals and fundamentalists and stuff, they obviously don't have the same number of kids as they did when, 50 years ago, when their preachers and ministers would actually preach from the Bible and not some sort of feel-good version of Christianity. The thing is that they still tend to be more conservative, and they tend to have bigger families. Whereas the people of the more mainstream, not so much. It's more like a old folks gathering when you go into those churches. Now, finally, we get back to that, those 4 things I talked about. The 4 reasons people have kids: accidents, the love of children, religion, and nationalism. And I think that if we tend to look at the forces that are marshaled against people having children, you will generally find that those people are very much against any kind of pride in your country or culture. Those people are usually negative towards religion. They see kids as a burden. The accident part doesn't count, but those are the things that they are pushing. If you go onto a forum, if you go anywhere where population is discussed, you'll find that's one thing that really solidifies those people that are really, really, really to the left, and the ones that don't like kids. There's some people in the left that love kids. I mean, they really do love families. They just happen to be politically left. But there is that kind that is very vocal, and they're very negative towards population growth. They're negative towards people that have kids, are the ones that will actually, you go to the store and you have 3 kids with you, they'll be like, don't you know how to stop? Those kinds of people. Remember, when they're out there promoting their thing, whether it be in your kid's school or be in whatever forum that you might find the public discusses issues, you got to remember what their agenda is. And if your agenda is one in which you're pro-religious, you have pride in your nation, you love family and so forth, maybe you should consider people with those values. Maybe you're the ones that should be having more kids and not feel guilty for bringing more people into the world. Anyway, don't take what I say. Just go out there and do some research yourself. See what you find. See if you don't find that there's a lot of stuff out there that really supports the idea that families are important, that maybe we could avoid the demographic winner. Okay? But just check it out. Anyway, that's all for tonight. And I'd like to thank you all for tuning in to Unlock the Door Radio here at UCY TV.